Once called the king of the underground bare-knuckle brawl scene, turned into MMA fighter, turned into pretty much celebrity. Not necessarily overnight, but Kimbo Slice sadly passed away yesterday due to heart failure at the age of 42 years old. Reports came in via TMZ and a few other sources throughout the day saying he was hospitalized, and that eventually turned into, again, unfortunately, his death, which shook the UFC world, shook the fighting world once again. We're already shaken up, I should say, from the passing of Muhammad Ali. At the same time, Kimbo Slice meant a lot to the UFC world and fighting world. Now, in Bellator, UFC, and of course, even more importantly, I would say, is when you ask a lot of people what their first video they watched on YouTube is, Kimbo Slice bare-knuckle fights in his backyard.
I'll go ahead. Do first! Finish that!
I just remember being middle school, and people saying, because that's when YouTube started becoming a big thing at that time, and people were saying, you got to go watch this guy Kimbo Slice beating up people in his backyard, getting into these bare-knuckle fights.
Yeah, I mean, and by the way, the amazing thing about Kimbo Slice is he would never kind of put on a show, right? Like, as if you started with street brawler and then you make it into the mainstream, right, and you start to make a lot of money off of this, you might have the chance and you might just like start to adapt to it and be like, oh yeah, I can do this no problem. Like, this is just the same thing. Whereas he appreciated the art of mixed martial arts, right? And he never alluded to the fact that he would be just an easy transition, right? I think back in 2010, I was reading an ESPN article that before his second UFC fight, he said, I'm really just having happy days in the mist, being among them, fighting on the undercards, just contributing to the UFC and the sport. That's really what I want to do. I'm not looking ahead to win the title or anything like that. I'm just enjoying each fight as it comes. And he said, these guys are holding the titles, heavyweight and light heavyweight. These guys are awesome. So you give respect to a guy like that. Like, yes, he was a natural brawler, man. Some of these fights were petrifying. Some of the guys had to literally stop, who are just as big as him, being like, take a minute. Like, it's a heavy punch you're throwing my way. So, and he would never kind of overshadow the fact that he always had punching power, but there was an art to that sport that he had to work on. And even in his later fights, we see him and Ken Shamrock, and people were like, it was just like two old men swinging punches at each other. It was still entertaining. He knows how to put on a show, and he was very entertaining to that sport. He was the main draw, I think, for the Bellator for
he was,
years.
And he brought in a lot of viewers because of him. Now, he was a rags to riches story in a way. He was homeless at one point in his life, and then he turned to becoming a bouncer at some clubs and even a porn company in Florida. And speaking of, you're a bouncer at a porn company. Like, if that's Kimbo Slices in front of the door, probably not getting through the door.
Chance.
So Kimbo Slices, there was a lot of reaction from the UFC world specifically, a lot of fighters paying respects to him. We have about 7 or 8 tweets, most of which saying the same thing, a rest in peace to him. So let's run through those pretty quickly before we wrap up on Kimbo's passing. So Shaq was one of the first. He said, I'm at a loss for words, rest in heaven, Kimbo Slice. Again, some of these pictures just show off. This guy was enormous. Stipe Miocic, the new Cleveland champion of the UFC. You never find anyone that could say a bad thing about Kimbo. Such a great guy, going to be missed. Rest easy, big fella. We'll get to more on that in just a second. We continue. Frankie Edgar, sad to hear about the news about Kimbo Slice. Kimbo Slice, condolences to his family. Showtime Pettis. And again, the list goes on. You can run through these and we can continue talking. You'll see, even like Nate Diaz. A lot of people went to Instagram for it. The biggest thing that I read so far on Kimbo Slice is that it sounds like Kimbo Slice just had a big heart. And even though he was this big guy, he was a gentle giant. He was just a guy you wanted to be around. So it's an unfortunate blow to the UFC and fighters and fans of Kimbo Slice.
And he's survived by 6 children, I believe. And he credited his MMA career for the fact that he could send them to college. One of his sons, actually Kevin Ferguson Jr., made his MMA debut in March. So looking to carry on in his father's footsteps. But it's sad to see another fighter go so young. Yeah. Only 42 years of age. And my God, the size of him. And as you mentioned, everyone that I read as well saying that he was just so gentle outside the ring for a guy that was such a warrior inside. So let us know what you guys think in the comment section below. Sad to see another fighter go. Again, hit us up on Twitter, Francis_Maxwell, Jason Rubin 91. I'll see you guys soon.